Hey, everybody. So when we left off, I said something very profound and obvious. Going through the grieving stage of anger is messy. It's one of the messiest stages because anger can manifest in so many different ways, in so many different situations. And when it is based from some kind of disappointment or trauma, it can become very messy for the other people around you who are experiencing your anger, who did not create your anger. And anger, which I've always known on some deeper level, because I've always said, well, anger is like that cover-up emotion to sadness, deep sadness and grief. Like it's what you do when you can't, just burst into tears or cry or mourn or moan, like grief. Like if you think of real pain, that grief, that this would make you howl almost, that kind of grief. And I've had some moments like that where I have just released so much, like in a very tiny little, through a little needle, eye of a needle, so to speak, that it came out in just such a almost scary sounding way. But it was based on that deep, deep kind of grief, but in the middle of being angry about something. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit further about this particular stage of grief and how that affects the healing process. One of the things that I thought was pretty profound that, the two other people that are intimately working with me all the time on the podcast, my engineer and our content creator, and both of them had something to say about anger. And I thought, this is so interesting because we're all going to have anger. And anger turned on yourself often shows up as depression. Anger on yourself, depression. I thought that was really profound and interesting. And then also that anger is just an expression of deep, deep grief, which is kind of like what I used to say about it being a secondary, it's like the thing that you can show the world, that face, but you can't show the grief and how deep it is. Anyway, it was just really good to think about like all of the various ways that for me, it came out in this, I don't know, it's like as this young, now married woman in my, I was married at about age 20, turning 24 or 24. It doesn't matter. But anyway, I was pretty young. It's certainly by today's standards, that's a pretty young to be married, and considering everything that I'd been through, it was, I wasn't prepared for, I hadn't done a lot of the healing work that I've done today. And like I said, I'm still healing and I'm still trying to figure out how to do relationships and all those things. But I think one of the core, another core kind of underlying belief that we have as women, and I'm sure this is true for maybe some men too, but I know for girls and young women, we're always talking about, or we're always taught, like you're supposed to be nice, you're supposed to be, sweet to everybody, and you're not supposed to make a big fuss, and, kind of take your emotions and go somewhere else with them, just suppress the anger, that, and even that anger can because it can become violent, and that for sure is not something that, I can count on one hand the number of times where my anger was violent enough that I literally kicked a door and it came off. It came down the door. It was an interior door. It wasn't an outside door, but an interior door that I was so upset and so angry that I did one of those high, karate type of kicks with the bottom of my foot against the door, and it came off. It went thud and it came to the ground. That was one time I was so angry and upset. And then another time when I hit my first husband. I kind of slapped him like that. And I was so stunned, and he was so stunned. That was horrible. But I'm just giving my true confession. I might as well tell all, because I don't want anybody out there to think that, I have it all figured out and I'm perfect, because I'm not. And I want people to know these are things that you do go through as part of the grieving process, as part of the process for healing, and that sometimes you have to get help to like mitigate some of these things so that you don't hurt someone else. That was another time. And then a third time was when my second marriage was coming to an end. And I saw something that I think had been written to my husband at the time. And I knew it was an old girlfriend. I knew who that was, but it felt like the thing that I found, the card that I found was current, like something was going on. And I wasn't 100% sure it was, but I got so angry, and it was snowing. And I was in my workout clothes, shorts and a tank top, because I've been doing some kind of, I don't know, Jane Fonda, some kind of an aerobics thing in my house. And then I found that, and he wasn't home. And I just went and just started running in the snow in my summer, workout clothes. And I just ran and ran and ran and cried and screamed when I was running. I was so mad. And there's probably been another time or two. We'll talk about that later as life progressed. But those years from about 20, right around the time I was getting married, and in my early 20s, when I was at school, I had to write a paper, and I've talked about this before, and that it was supposed to be on some section or experience in your life, only, in a condensed period of time. And that was the first time that I had ever really formally written about what had happened to me, and basically wrote my story of being, brainwashed and kidnapped and raped. And that was the first time I called my mom or my dad, maybe both of them, maybe my dad at the store, my mom at home, and just got really mad and said, why didn't you know? Why didn't you see? Why did I have to go through this? It was all about me, and how bad I felt that I had to go through this, and that they should have known more. And to my parents' credit, both of their responses were, we are so sorry. We truly didn't know. We didn't see. We just had no idea that this kind of person monster could exist in the world, especially not in our safe, wonderful community and congregation and lives. And my dad said, I knew he was evil at some point, but I had no idea he was this despicable, that he would ever do something like this. Because first of all, we never talked about things like that. We'd never really known anybody. I mean, not that it hadn't happened to other people, but nobody talked. There was not, a context for really having a conversation about abuse. And so when I got angry writing that paper, I called several times throughout that. It was the end of the semester, kind of the big project. Like if you got an A on that, it didn't matter what all your other test scores were, you get an A in the class. And I got an A on that project, but it really kind of started to stir the pot of anger. And a lot of people say, well, I don't talk about these things because I'm afraid it will make me so angry that maybe I would, go hurt my perpetrator or somebody else or whatever. And I understand that, because you can get that angry. As I think back about those moments, they started in my 20s, because by the time when I knew that the whole brainwashing story wasn't true at 16, and I think this is very common for most survivors, I just wanted to be normal. I had felt so abnormal. I had felt like an alien. I thought I was an alien. I felt like I didn't fit in anywhere. I felt like all the other girls who, had started developing, and I hadn't. I mean, that didn't happen till my senior year, and I was almost graduated before I started developing as my body changed. And so I had always felt like a weirdo. I had always felt like I was not normal. And so I think a lot of people who go through that altered state of reality, which is when you're in abuse and you're not telling or talking because your reality is, I can't, or I shouldn't, or if I do, I'll get in trouble or somebody will get hurt. You come out of that phase of what has been your life, and now what you want is just to be normal. And so I worked really hard at being normal and looking normal and doing normal things. And for me, it took me to the extreme of, I'd always been a pretty, I wanted to achieve things and do things. I was always pretty type A kind of personality anyway. That was how I came. But I really threw myself into, I wanted straight A's. I was going to get as many parts and leads in the plays and the musicals as I possibly could. I was going to be in the choir, and I was going to do student government. And I did everything I could possibly do at school, still feeling like I was a little awkward and weird all through it. And so surprised, completely surprised when I won to be the senior class president my senior year of high school. And I was running against a girl who was so popular. In my mind, I was never popular. I never fit in the popular crowd. I was not that person. I was kind of, I don't know. I never felt like I fit in with that crowd or that they liked me. And they had so much influence, and they said, "Oh, we all voted for you because, and I was like, why?" They're like, "Because you're the hardest working. You're going to be really good at this." That was kind of how I coped, and just jumped back in with my family and my sisters and my friends, and just wanted to do everything right, everything normal, same way with, everything at church or everything in the community that I was involved with. I just wanted to do it really, really well. And especially my theater part of my life, that became very, very important to me. So as I go through kind of remembering these steps of the grieving process, which was part of the healing process, the anger thing started to find its way. It was very early 20s. Then I went on a mission for 2 years. Then I came home, and all through that time I had met my first husband, and we were in a performing group together and traveled the world, and came home from the mission, got back in that same performing group, and we got married. And then we had some amazing experiences by traveling around the world, singing and dancing and being the ambassadors for Brigham Young University. And so when I got to go to India, I think this is a very typical, and of course my son hasn't been born yet. It took me a while to get pregnant, which I think is also, I was very angry about that too. But before that, we had this opportunity. We're going to India, and we spend an entire day with Mother Teresa. Literally. She comes up to my armpit, and I have a picture with my arm around her. And it was one of the most life-changing days of my life. And, I'm married now to my husband. We go on this tour together, and we're with all these other, young ambassadors. That was the name of the group. And we had this amazing day and saw her orphanages and all the little children that came calling her mother. And then we went to her home for the dying and had never seen anything like that before. It was just like a warehouse, kind of. It was covered, but it was like the size of a football field. It was just this huge place that had cots just lined up back and forth all through that place. And the people that they would take off the street who were dying, they were not going to be able to rehabilitate or to feed them. It was beyond that point for them. And she was giving them a dignified place to die. And of course, we're these, young Americans who have never gone a day hungry. It was life-changing. I think I'm emotional because, there are wars raging, and I can't imagine. I was going through my own internal battle from what I had been through, but the trauma, of abuse is often compared to the traumas of war, because the war is usually being fought with someone that is supposed to love you, and that you're supposed to, then you probably already do love them and trust them, because it's often, almost always, somebody that you know and love and trust. And anyway, we had this amazing day with Mother Teresa. And you contrast that day with when we went to see the Taj Mahal. That was another place that we were going to all these wonderful places throughout India, Agra being one of them. And when we got there, my husband and I got in this huge fight. I don't know what I was angry about that day, but I spent a lot of time being angry. So literally, the rest of our group is inside of the Taj Mahal singing a song like I am a child of God or something like that. I mean, something very sweet, very much like we're all brothers and sisters, all of us around the world. We're all children of a God that loves us. It's this song that talks about that. And instead of my husband and I being in there singing with them, we're outside in back of the Taj Mahal screaming at each other. And so I tell these stories because what I experienced in that first, marriage was me trying to figure out how to grieve what I had lost in those teenage and tweenage years, and trying to figure out how to become a more functioning and understanding and an adult that could actually communicate in a way that wasn't yelling or wasn't angry all the time. And I look back on so many experiences like that one, and yes, I can kind of laugh about it now, but it was a part of my healing process, and it was something that I can give a lot of credit to the different men that have been in my life and in my relationship life. And I learned some really great things, and I healed in certain ways because of those relationships. So I hope that anything that I say is not making somebody on the other end of this conversation feel as if I'm blaming anybody, just my own trauma and my own place where I was trying to figure out, who I am and how to be something that I didn't get a chance to kind of learn along the way, so to speak. And so another experience for me was that I had a really difficult time getting pregnant, and I really wanted that. It was something that was always a part of my plan. If you've watched the 9-part series, there's a very short scene that talks about what a hope chest is. The thing is that he actually supplied me with a hope chest one of the Christmases that he was our friend and had the furniture store, and it was a scratch and dent kind of thing. And he said, oh, it's got this scratch on the back, but nobody will ever see the back, but I can just, give it to you. Let's just give it to Jan so she'll have a hope chest. So, she can start putting in those little items, little children's books I would buy it when they would be on sale. I mean, just as a young girl, or I would save certain things that had been important to me, like when I was 6 or 7, and mom's like, well, nobody's going to read these books anymore. Should we give them to the Goodwill, to the thrift store? And I was like, oh no, I have to keep those in my hope chest. So things like that. And things that we did as projects with my mom. Like she taught us how to embroider, and we did that. Things that we did with Gail Birchtold. We did certain ceramics that I still have and that I would paint. One's a little cheerleader. One's a little lady that's, sweeping and mopping the floor, and she's got her hair pulled back and, got a little broom in her hand. And I still have those. And I put them in my hope chest. Those were things I was going to use to decorate, my little kid's bedroom, or that I would use, like the dish rags that we embroidered, that would be used in my kitchen someday, And so when I think about the fact that he got a hope chest for me and then was always describing, well, maybe we should go and buy some things to put in your hope chest. I look back on how calculated every single move was that he made. And I also look back on my innocence. And that was a lot of where this grief and anger came from, is how messed up that got for me. And I could not get pregnant and never was on birth control. It was that example of this deep grief that came out as anger. And through a number of experiences that I had at that time with my son's father, I really did go through some deep pains that I had just danced over in those years when I was just trying to be normal. And so I think, that we start to bargain almost. We start the bargaining process. Like, if I do this, please let me have that. And that was very true with having a child. Like, I will do things better. And I can remember kind of one time in a prayer, just kind of begging for, I so want to have a child. I so want to be a mom, a mother. And, I just don't know if something that happened to me? Is this being not a punishment, but just that this is what the result is that I can't get pregnant? Like, is something wrong with me? Can you please, just let me know the next time I go to the doctor, and just make sure that there isn't something wrong with me. And if we can figure out that part, then I'll do more service for the young women. Like I talked about being the leader of the young women and when I was in Florida, that program in our church, and that I would serve more and that I would do more. And you do this bargaining thing, and then when you still don't get what you want, it really can bring on more depression and more anger sometimes. So that's just one of those things that I definitely know that if I had stayed in that space, which I know this is like going into like it's another stage of grief, is this bargaining thing. But it also was very connected to what I was angry about, because I wanted something that I didn't know that I was going to be able to. I didn't know if it was possible, because it just didn't happen. It didn't happen and didn't happen. And at this point we're at Disney World, and I'm like a swing, so I have like 9 different parts in shows that I know, and that I bounce around and do different shows depending on who broke their leg or who's sick or whatever. And then what became my regular job was at the World Dancers, and I would sing in all the different languages, like 10 different languages. And I'd join in with the dancers from all these costumes and these songs from, around the world. It was right at the Epcot Center, right? Perfect place for that show. And it was shortly after I was in that show, and I hardly ever saw, my husband. He was in a whole different part of the park. He wasn't at the Epcot Center. He was doing this role that was out in the Fort Wilderness, where people would come and park their, I guess, or maybe there were cabins out there. I think there were actual cabins, but anyway, that's where they would stay. And they had this huge barn-like a dinner show in there. And I knew all those ladies' roles in that show as well. I had done that, it was like 6 people, 3 men, 3 women. And once I got this more permanent job and still could go and swing other things, I barely saw him, because his shows were in the evening and all of my shows started the first show was at like 10:30 or 11 o'clock in the morning. And we had like 5 shows throughout the day. And then I'd go home and he's just barely left, to go out and do Jim Handy out of the Hoop-De-Doo Review. And so we barely ever saw each other. And I think that maybe the fact that I don't know, this sounds terrible, but it was the fact that he and I were so busy in our own shows and in our own world, and we didn't have the stress of really seeing each other, so we weren't fighting. And that was when I got pregnant. And I think there might be something to that. That was huge for me. A lot of other stressors that we were dealing with were, personal to my ex-husband, and trying to deal with things like, do we stay married? I'm pregnant. Yes, we're going to stay married. We want to make sure this baby has every opportunity, to have both of us, and we're going to work out our differences and our problems and all these things, which again, I might talk more fully about at a different point in time. And so as we decided that, we really had some wonderful months leading up to, being pregnant and going on walks. And then when our baby was born, it was almost like this is like heaven on earth. For several months, it was just like, it was so fabulous. It was so fantastic. It was just a kind of peace. And of course, I didn't have to go back to work right away. Disney was a wonderful company to work for, basically paid for the entire, pregnancy, and to go home and nest all through almost all of those months. They were like, "Oh, I think we can see you. You might be showing. Do you want to just, take 3/4 of your salary and just go home and nest for the next 6 months?" I'm like, "Yes." And I did. And it was just a really special time right after he was born, and the stress of life and some other things that we were trying to work through didn't start to really come back until maybe he was around 6 months old. And then it got rough again. And I ended up leaving Florida, Orlando, and coming back home. And being with my parents for a few months, and then I wanted to finish school. And so I first time I ever worked on a film set happened during that period of time after I had left Orlando and come home and was doing a show at Sundance. And somebody saw me and said, I want to represent you. You're a really good actress. And so that's what happened. And I did my first film during that when he was just like a year, maybe 15 months old. I did my first thing. And then I finished school, got my degree in theater and acting with a minor in Spanish. And then we decided, right around that time was, actually, I don't even think I had quite graduated yet, but my little boy was about a year and a half, and just through a series of conversations, just decided that it would be better for all of us if we parted ways and stayed friends, and he would be very involved in our child's life, and I would be a single mom for a bit. And that didn't last very long. I actually got married again, not too long after that, because my son was still 2 years old when I got married the second time, and that was the marriage where I went out almost 2 years later, running in the snow in my workout clothes because I was so angry. And even though we tried doing some counseling and I went to a program called the Landmark Forum and felt like, okay, we can do anything now, because I turned 30 that year, and my son was born when I was 27. So, it took a long time for me to get pregnant and then to have this baby. And at age 30, when I was married the second time, I went through that program and thought, okay, we can clear all of the past away and we can really start fresh. And then I encouraged him to go, and he went and came back and said, we have nothing in common. We've been good for each other in some ways, which was true. I'd done a lot of sexual healing in that second marriage. And I can talk a little bit more about that maybe in the next episode. But again, somebody, these are two, my first husband is still very important in my life and my son's life. And so is his partner. And so are, the extended family members and everybody, it's still very important. And those are things that I always was committed to. Second marriage served a purpose for me personally, really in a healing place that I needed to go, that I hadn't been able to really access with my first husband, not to the point that I could with my second husband. And that was also a part of my healing journey. And, the bargaining part of grief, we're going to talk about that next time. But as I go back through these different challenges in the relationships that I had, and also in the anger that I was experiencing, which it did have sort of a, it did kind of abate right around that age 30, going through that program, because the forum allowed me to look at my past as something that was in the past, that had been kind of running my present life, and that it didn't have to do that. It allowed me to hang up my abuse, so to speak, take this heavy coat that I had been wearing and kind of I didn't even know that I had it on like a badge of honor or something, and that I could take it off and hang it up on the coat rack and look at it and go, okay, if I need somebody's sympathy or I need it because it feels like a protection to me, which it really isn't, but it felt that way, I can grab the coat and put it back on, but I don't have to wear it all the time. And I really got some freedom that when I turned 30 and did that course on that very thing, that we get to be back in the creative, in the driver's seat of our own lives. And so that's really where I want to end this episode, is that the anger started to be replaced by some other things. And bargaining was part of my anger piece and my grief journey and my healing journey. And so we're going to talk a little bit more of some other examples of when I was really experiencing some grief, and how the bargaining part of this next part was very also instrumental towards, getting into another step on the healing path. So being a mother, had its challenges for me, but I was so in love with being a mother. I always wanted to be a mom, and I just was so in love with my little person that I really created with him. We just had a very, very close relationship, because we were always together. I didn't let him go into daycare or anything. I worked jobs that I could take him with me. I lived very poor, but I didn't care. That didn't matter to me. What really mattered was that I was there for him. And I believe that was, that is something that I can say I'm very happy that that's the way my thinking was, is that I may not know how to be the best mother in the world, and I know there will be challenges and all of those things, but I also know that what mattered most for me in my early childhood was that my parents were there. My mom was there. My dad came home every day. We ate dinner together. He was there. We were together. That for me is why I survived what I survived, and how I feel so badly, for those who it is a parent, that is abusing them, because that's just something that's just a level beyond what I can imagine. And yet people do come through, and they do find their way out, and their way onto the healing path, even when that is their that cross to bear, or that thing that I can't imagine, because I had that with my own parents. So the patterns of coming out of abuse, really, I started to tell my story right around this age too. Like, I remember the first little book club that a friend of mine, who was also a performer at Disney World, had a book club and asked me to come and share my story, because I'd shared it with her. And I was like, I don't have anything to say. I don't have a book, or I don't have anything, and she's like, well, no, just share your story. Just let them ask questions. And that was when I was 27, because my son was in a little baby, carrier. And so that became the first time. And by the time I went through that forum, that Landmark Forum program, I knew I wanted to share my story. And I knew that there was something tied up in my story and what had happened to me that was going to, by telling it, was going to help not only me heal, but maybe other people find their voice. And I didn't know how. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I just knew that I would start talking about my story and what had happened, because it wasn't running my life anymore in the way it had been prior to that Landmark Forum experience, which really did kind of erase all that had happened to me, not from my memory. I still have all the memory, but it wasn't in my life running or ruining my life or my relationships like it had been. And so we'll pick up there next time, because yes, anger is messy, and it causes relationships to be put under such stress, and with yourself and with others, that my relationships did not survive. And it was messy for me, and it was messy for my child. So I started telling my story around that time, and I knew that I wanted to bring it out in a larger way, but I didn't know how. And we'll pick up there next time. Thanks.